Story 1. I-24M came out to my mother when I was 22 years old. She did not take it well. This specific scenario happened years ago, but I was previously advised to share stories about my mother on this subreddit, as many believed she fit the entitled parent template. I am finally acting on that advice. For context, my mother had the usual negative responses that some parents tend to have. She told me I had turned my back on everything I was raised to believe, that I was just confused, and that I was being deceived by negative influences. She is deeply religious, and while I personally have no issue with religion, she practices it in a very rigid and controlling way. She even went as far as to say that the romance novels I was reading and my Catholic friend had brainwashed me into believing I was transgender, and that was just one of the milder reactions she had. After I came out, she started leaving small index cards with Bible verses on them, along with explanations she had written about how those verses supposedly proved I was not actually transgender or that being transgender was wrong. She also blamed my Catholic friend, along with some of my other friends, for convincing me of something she believed was not true. Just to be clear, my friends never pushed any beliefs or ideas on me. We never even discussed the possibility of me being transgender until I was the one who brought it up to them. Eventually, I became comfortable enough to introduce my chosen name to my siblings. Naturally, I told my mother as well, even though I knew she would never use it. However, it was not enough for her to simply refuse to acknowledge my new name. She was also upset that my brother and other people in our apartment complex had chosen to respect it. A major argument broke out when my younger brother 17M, who has become very passionate about standing up for transgender rights, confronted my mother in my defense. His most famous moment was shouting loudly enough for me to hear from my bedroom. Her pronouns are him, Mom. Bless his heart, he really tried. This particular incident happened when my brother became frustrated that my mother refused to use my chosen name, especially since all my siblings had started making an effort to adjust. Even my older brother 25M, despite his own unique views, had at least begun to use my new name. My mother had a whiteboard where she would leave messages for us before heading to work, usually listing chores for the day and other reminders. As expected, she never used my chosen name on that board. I accepted this without making a fuss, knowing that arguing with her would be pointless. However, my younger brother is incredibly empathetic and has always had a sense of when something is bothering me. Without my knowledge, he started changing my name on the board, replacing my dead name with my chosen name every time she wrote it. When I found out, I was secretly proud of him for being such a strong ally, but I also knew it was going to lead to a confrontation with my mother. And I was right. That night, my mother came into my room and insisted that I stop using the name Ren. She demanded that I continue using my dead name with everyone, telling me that it was incredibly selfish and inconsiderate of me to change the name she and my father had worked so hard to come up with. She claimed it had taken them months to decide on the perfect name for me. My father, by the way, does not seem to care much about my name change. The only reason my dead name had any significance to him was that it was a modified version of his own name. Even he has agreed to call me Junior as a compromise, and he fully accepts that Ren is my new name. I actually like the nickname and find it adorable. My mother, however, insisted that by changing my name, I was throwing away the gift she and my father had given me. Here's a fun fact. My dead name was not actually supposed to be my dead name. My mother originally planned to give me a different name, but my aunt insisted that her child, who was due just a couple of months after me, should have that name instead. In the end, neither of us ended up with that name. Because of this, I have strong reasons to believe that my mother does not actually care about my dead name. Instead, she only has an issue with me changing my name because I am transgender. And this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to my mother. Story 2. Backstory. Back in 2014, my mom helped my entitled aunt and her entitled family move and live in our land. My mom is a sweet woman who always trusts the good inside every human being. And at that time my entitled aunt didn't have any place to live in, Their previous landlord had kicked them out. I don't know the reason, but maybe because they are so entitled. My family has big land and can build at least 3 houses inside, so my mom figures we should let them live in our land until they save up enough to buy one themselves. Oh my, that was a big mistake. So fast forward to 2016. I was obsessed with art, so I bought a lot of art stuff like colors, brushes, etc. One day, I got home from school to find out all of my art stuff was broken, missing and lying all over the place, and what more, the entitled aunt's kids were trying to ruin my latest piece of work, which I spent days drawing. I'm a quiet type of person, but seeing my precious works and expensive art tools being ruined angered me. I also have short-tempered, so I shout at them so loud that my mom and my entitled aunt can even hear it from the kitchen. They quickly ran up, and before I could say anything, my entitled cousin jumped in while crying and said that I yelled at them for no reason. My aunt yelled back at me for shouting at her precious kid, but my mom quickly realized what happened, cause believe me, even a dumb toddler can see what they had done to my room. My mom asked my aunt, how can the kid get my art tools and work down there since I leave them in a very high spot in my room, that even the adults have to use a chair to get them. My entitled aunt said that she thinks those are toys, and she needs something for the kid to stay still while she is making lunch. Her kitchen is broken, so she has to come to our house to cook. My mom is a calm person and doesn't want to make things get too big, so she demands my entitled aunt buys me back my art tools. You guys know what she said? Of course, it would be something entitled. She said, "Oh geez, it's just some stupid junk. You call this a drawing? My son can draw better than this. I don't need to waste my money on these stupid garbage." At this point, I'm really angry and ready to beat some sense into both her and her kid, but my mom stops me and tells them to leave. They have to eat outside for about a month before their kitchen is fixed. She had never bought back any of my art tools, but that was not the end of the story yet. Fast forward again to 2018. Their entitled family still lived in our land, and now they had shown their true intention. They want our land. I was in college at this point of time, and just got home from my part-time job, waiting for some hot and delicious food. But before I could even enter the house, I heard voices come from the back of our house. It was the entitled aunt's voice. "We will not move out of this house. It's our house, our land. This big land is not even yours to begin with. It's from father-in-law. Yeah, our land used to belong to my grandfather, but my parents bought it from him with a large amount of money." My mom said, "I'm very sorry, but you will have to leave. My husband just lost his job, and we need to sell our land to get some money to live until he gets a new job." I was a college student, and with only my part-time job salary alone couldn't pay all the family bills. And yes, my dad just lost his job for a month at that point. My aunt said, "I don't care, it's your family problem, not mine. This is our home, and I'm not going anywhere." Then she slammed her door and left my mom on the verge of crying outside. I took my mom back to our house and told her that Dad already had my nice uncle, who is a lawyer, take care of the problem. Me and my dad had already talked about the situation and informed my nice uncle a week before that happened. My nice uncle gladly accepted help and would come soon. 3 days later, my nice uncle, my dad, and my mom came to the back of my house to talk to my entitled aunt's family for the last time. I came with them too, of course, since I had a day off, and because my dad had a feeling something bad might happen, and my dad was right. After a long arguing times about this land was not our and the house was there, my entitled aunt sees that they couldn't talk over this since they have no right to begin with. They started to use violence. My entitled uncle, the entitled aunt's husband, went and took out a long iron stick and used it to hit my nice uncle and my dad, forcing them to run. While we were trying to stop my entitled uncle, I heard a loud slap noise. I looked and saw that the demon aunt slapped my mom. And you know what? Something in my head just popped. I rushed there and punched the freak out of my aunt. My entitled uncle trying to rush in and hit me with his stick, but I stopped it and kicked him where it hurts, pinned him down and continued to hit him with all the force that I think I have in my life, to the point that I think if my dad and nice uncle didn't stop me, he would be dead by then. Not proud of the violence, but they started it. My entitled aunt just looked at me with fear or anger. I don't know, I was too angry to notice anything anyway. After that, my entitled aunt got hospitalized because I broke his nose and a lot of teeth, and the police took me for a few hours. Turns out, every neighbor hated them since they were trying to steal a lot of stuff. And the police also hated them for bringing them trouble. Besides, I know some of the police too since my best friend is the son of one. They took my story, joke about if their mother got hit like that, they would do the same. And then I got back home. No one stood up for them, no evidence, so they couldn't sue me. Soon after that, they were forced to leave. We sold our land for a good amount of money. Now I live in a nicer house with 4 floors and a good view. I also have a tablet to continue drawing. Now I'm a digital artist. Everything seems good for our family. And about my entitled aunt's family, I haven't got any news of them since then. We cut our contact with them anyway, but I think they are still somewhere in our country trying to trick someone else. Story 3. Hello, fellow fans of entitled parent stories. On the advice of my therapist, I've decided to start sharing some stories about my incredibly unreasonable biological mother. Maybe we can all get a laugh or two out of it. Many of these stories probably belong on a forum for stories about unreasonable parents, but this one is goofy enough that I felt you all might enjoy it. When I was 23 years old, I caused my 54-year-old mother, whom I lived with at the time, to have a full-blown tantrum, similar to that of a 3-year-old, over me getting a service dog. Some background. I have a pretty serious visual disability that significantly impacts my mobility. I have no balance, which means I often walk off stairs and curbs without realizing it. In short, I used to accidentally hurt myself a lot. Because of this, I had been looking into getting a service dog for a while. Mobility aids like canes and walkers just didn't work for me, and I secretly hoped that having a service dog might also help with the serious burnout I was experiencing due to world events at the time. After about a year of rejections from service dog organizations, my best friend randomly showed up at my house one day with pictures of border collie puppies. There was one particular puppy I immediately fell in love with. I can't really explain it, but we connected instantly, even though I hadn't even met the little troublemaker yet. Something about that pup just clicked. I wasn't one to make spontaneous decisions like that, but this time I told my friend that if the puppy was still available, I would take her. My mother, however, was less than thrilled at even the idea of it. We had dogs in the house while I was growing up, but my mother, being, to put it nicely, an extremely stubborn person, had a tendency to double down on things once she decided they were bad, no matter how irrational her reasoning was. The process begins. A little while later, my friend called to let me know that the puppy was still looking for a home. I reached out to a service dog organization and explained the situation. They told me it might be possible to train the puppy, but they would need to evaluate her temperament and other factors first. I passed along the necessary contact information, and the trainers met with the puppy's mother's owner. Soon after, I was given a temporary green light. I was over the moon. Not only was I finally getting my own service dog after waiting for so long, but for the first time in nearly a year, I actually felt happy enough to get out of bed before 6 p.m. Over the next few weeks, I prepared for my new companion's arrival. I set up vet appointments, got a training crate, bought food and toys, the whole 9 yards. As I got more excited, my mother became increasingly hostile. At first, it was subtle, the dryer door mysteriously getting opened, food I had prepared being thrown away, that sort of thing. But then, it escalated into outright sabotage. I had to replace the dog's leash 3 times because it kept getting cut. Then came the breaking point. The breaking point. Everything came to a head on a day trip to the mountains. The plan was to decorate graves, have a meal together, and just enjoy the day. I was in an unusually good mood, maybe a little too cheerful, because just a few days prior, I had been given my dog's official pickup date. My sister, who had organized the trip, and her kids were aware of this, but my mother was not. As the day went on, tension started rising. Everyone else was excited, both about the trip and about the new addition to the family. But my mother? She was getting more and more irritated. It all boiled over when we went to eat. Suddenly, I was being verbally picked apart left and right she kept going on about how I didn't need a dog, how my condition wasn't that bad, and how I was exaggerating. For context, I can't see more than a few inches past my face. Then, in a moment of absolute brilliance, my sister had had enough. She turned to my mother and flat out told her to stop, because I had already been approved for this assistant's dog and would be picking her up in 2 weeks. You could have heard a pin drop. And then, my 50-something-year-old mother proceeded to throw an actual tantrum. She started sobbing, screaming, and kicking like a toddler. She yelled about how she didn't want a dog, how it wasn't fair that this was being forced on her, and my personal favorite, how she didn't like the breed. She insisted she wanted a Yorkshire Terrier instead, as if this was about her preference and not my actual medical needs. It got so bad that we were asked to leave the restaurant. Then, as we were heading outside, she got even angrier and threw her phone to the ground so hard that it shattered. The next thing I knew, she was on her knees in the middle of the parking lot, wailing like something out of a dramatic movie scene. The aftermath. The wildest part of this entire ordeal. Before I actually got my service dog, my mother had been supportive of the idea. I still have no idea what changed. Even 2 years later, after I had my dog fully trained and working as a service animal, she still couldn't stand them. In fact, the ongoing tension over the dog was a huge part of why I ended up moving out. But that's a whole different story. Now, 5 years later, she is obsessed with my dog and acts like none of this ever happened. Figures, right? I know this story is pretty tame compared to some of the wild stuff that gets posted here, but I hope you enjoyed reading it. Have a good one. Story 4. A little backstory. I own a really nice gray Land Cruiser that looks like a monster truck and costs a significant amount of money, not because of the car itself, but mostly due to the parts inside it. I live in a pretty good neighborhood, but unfortunately, it's right next to the busiest road in my area. Also, at the time of this story, I was underage when it came to drinking, so I had never consumed alcohol in my life, unless it was during a church service. Now, let's meet the people involved in this story. Entitled Mother M, a truly unpleasant excuse for a parent. Poor kid PK, her child, who doesn't really play much of a role in this story. Police Officer Poe, my guardian angel that day. Me, the luckiest person in the world. Alright, let's get started. One evening, I received a message from my coworker saying there was a major problem at work and that I needed to come in immediately. I work at a computer repair shop, and if they're calling me in outside of my shift, it usually means there's a serious issue, one that could cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars if not handled properly. So, I quickly left my house, jumped into my Land Cruiser, and drove off in a bit of a rush. A few minutes later, I was about 3 miles away from work when I stopped at a red light at a major intersection on the busiest road in the entire city. Accidents happen here almost every other day. One time, there were even 2 crashes on the same day. So, it wasn't all that surprising that I found myself in one. As soon as the light turned green, I accelerated forward, slightly ahead of the cars beside me since I was in a hurry. Just as I was about to clear the intersection, a large red minivan came barreling toward me and T-boned my car. We both went sliding in different directions, though my car, being much heavier than hers, didn't move nearly as much. The shock of the impact nearly knocked me out. I shook it off and looked out my window, trying to figure out what had just happened. It honestly felt like someone had launched a missile straight into the right side of my vehicle. When I stepped out of my car to assess the damage, I saw that my passenger side door had taken a massive hit. The mirror was shattered, and there was a deep dent in the frame. Luckily, nothing else was visibly damaged. That's when entitled Mother and poor kid entered the scene. M screaming, "What were you doing? Trying to speed through a red light like that? You could have killed me or my child. We have a very important birthday party to attend." Me. "I'm sorry, but I had a green light. You didn't. I had the right of way." M lowering her voice to an accusatory tone. "No, you didn't. We had the right of way, not you." Me. "Explain to me how you had the right of way." M. I don't have to explain anything to you. You drunk fool. Are you going to pay for my car or what? I turned to look at her minivan. The front end was completely wrecked. It honestly looked like it had been rammed by a herd of bulls and then smashed with a wrecking ball for good measure. I was genuinely shocked that she and her child had survived. The driver's seat headrest even had a piece of metal lodged into it. It was nothing short of a miracle that she wasn't seriously injured. Me. No. You are going to pay for the damage you caused to my car. In hindsight, this was probably the wrong thing to say. M. Furious. Excuse me. You drunk moron? You honestly think I'm going to pay for your trashy piece of junk? You and your drunk friends probably pulled it out of a scrapyard. Me. Yes, ma'am. Again, probably not the best response. M. How dare you talk to me like that in front of my child? You're a terrible person. Your mother probably abandoned you because you were the ugliest, most worthless person in your entire family. I bet the orphanage you live in got tired of you and gave you a few bucks to buy this hunk of metal with wheels. At this point, I had reached my limit. Me angry. That's it. I'm calling the police if someone hasn't already. PK pleading with his mother. Mom, please stop. He hasn't done anything wrong. M. He's done everything wrong. 10 minutes of yelling later, 3 police cars and an ambulance arrived at the scene. Poe approaching me. Excuse me, sir, can you explain what happened here? Me. Well, I was go. M. interrupting, fake crying. Officer, it was horrible. This reckless man was drunk driving and ran a red light. It was clearly red. He almost killed me and my child. Once again, I was underage, and I was clearly sober. Me? That's absolutely not true, officer. This woman is lying. You can see for yourself that I'm sober. There were plenty of witnesses to the accident, and they can confirm that she was the one at fault. Poe. Well, I'm going to need to check both of you and review the security footage from the intersection. Thankfully, there were cameras installed at the intersection that had captured everything. M. realizing she was about to get caught. Oh, there's no need to do all that. We can just exchange insurance information and… Poe. I'm sorry, ma'am, but it's my job to determine what happened and who was at fault. We will be reviewing the footage together. The officer pulled up the footage and, sure enough, it clearly showed that M. had run a red light and was speeding at least 20 miles per hour over the limit. The speed limit was 50. The officer then proceeded to check us both with a breathalyzer. Unsurprisingly, I was completely sober. M., however, was a different story. The police officer checked her blood alcohol level, and though I don't remember the exact number, it was dangerously high. Quoting the officer, she was at a level equivalent to driving with both eyes closed and using her feet. As if that wasn't bad enough, when officers searched her car, they found a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels in the back seat. At this point, I thought, wow, this is a complete disaster for her. But believe it or not, things were about to get much, much worse. It turned out that M wasn't actually on her way to a birthday party. She was attempting to leave the city. Why? Because, as it turned out, she had 3 pouches of illegal substances with an estimated street value of around $2,000 hidden in her trunk. And that's still not the worst part. During the search, officers also discovered that she was armed. They found a loaded handgun and a 6-inch switchblade inside her center console. Now, carrying a firearm in my state is only legal under specific conditions, and she definitely wasn't following any of them. At this point, I was standing there in complete shock. I had gone from dealing with an entitled driver to witnessing the arrest of a full-blown criminal. In the end, the damage she caused amounted to $5,600 in repairs to my Land Cruiser, plus several $1,000s in additional penalties. But that was nothing compared to what she was facing. Her final list of charges: driving under the influence, reckless driving for running the red light and speeding, possession of illegal substances, illegal possession of a firearm, endangering a minor. The result: 10.5 years in prison, 3 years on probation, mandatory parenting classes, and a massive speeding ticket. As for her son, he was sent to live with his biological father, who had divorced M years ago due to her struggles with addiction and alcoholism. Honestly, I wouldn't even call her a mother. She willingly took her own child along on what was essentially a drug trafficking trip. Story 5. I, 24F, am a child of divorce. My biological parents separated when I was 4 years old. My mother started dating again when I was 7, and she met a wonderful man whom I loved dearly. However, my father, who was not the best decision-maker, dated several women between the time I was 4 to 8. During half of that time, he was in and out of my life. But that's not the focus of this story. This is about his last girlfriend, who later became his wife before he passed away. My stepmother, whom I unaffectionately call my ex-stepmother, entered my life after meeting my father at a women's rehabilitation group in my hometown. My father and his Christian rock band performed there. This was a very religious area in the southern United States. I always had issues with the women who came into my life, mainly due to bullying over my unusual name, which my father had given me, and because his first girlfriend after leaving my mother was abusive toward me and my younger sister. On top of that, my parents divorced because my father was frequently using illegal substances. I was fully aware of what the rehabilitation group was for, which only made me more skeptical of his new relationship. She first appeared when I was 8.5 years old. I remember it was summertime because my birthday is in January. It was my dad's week. We had shared custody, and he was planning to take me and my sister to our uncle's house to go swimming. However, we were waiting for her. That was when my dad told me and my then 7-year-old sister that they had been dating for 3 months without informing us. For context, my dad had previously screamed at my mom for not telling him she was seeing someone, so I found this quite hypocritical. I distinctly remember looking at my dad, then at her, then back at him before pointing at her and saying, "She's going to do something bad." That was the beginning of our dynamic. Fast forward, my dad married her, and I ended up being used as a test subject for her psychology degree, which she never actually completed. By the time I was 11, I was playing in my bedroom with my sister and cousin while waiting for lunch after church on Super Bowl Sunday in 2012. My sister and cousin were using the computer in my room since we didn't have enough televisions. They were playing Movie Star Planet, which was popular at the time, and were using the camera feature. When the flash went off, I suddenly started feeling very strange. I began seeing red dots everywhere and told them about it. My cousin jokingly said that I was about to have a seizure, and, to my surprise, he was right. I don't remember much about what happened next. Most of my knowledge comes from my sister, cousin, and father recounting the event after I regained consciousness. Apparently, the two of them ran downstairs to get a drink, leaving me on the bed. My dad came upstairs to get me for lunch and found me having a full grand mal seizure out of nowhere. He did everything he could to keep me from hurting myself while calling emergency services. I have a vague memory of waking up briefly in the ambulance, with my dad reassuring me that I was okay and should go back to sleep, which I did. The next thing I knew, I heard noises, one of them being, "Touchdown, Patriots," followed by my dad cheering. The first thing I said upon waking up was to ask if he was watching the Super Bowl without me. That was when the room erupted. For the first time since I was very young, my mom and dad were in the same room and not screaming at each other, though it wouldn't be the last, but that's another story. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in a hospital room, still in my church dress, which I had planned to change out of after lunch before the game. My mom and dad called the doctor back in to check on me, and I was scheduled for multiple follow-up appointments. Unfortunately, I had to return to the hospital soon after because I had a severe allergic reaction to the seizure medication they gave me while I was unconscious. This next part was told to me years later by my mother when I was around 17. While I was passed out undergoing tests, my stepmother, rather than checking on me, called our pastor to pray over me. He was a good man, but I now have nothing to do with the Christian faith because of her and my dad. Since it was a smaller hospital, and I was a minor. Only direct family members were allowed in my room. My stepmother told the hospital staff that she was my biological mother. We looked nothing alike, and she was only 28 while I was 11. When my real mother arrived, the pastor, who was outside the room, told her it was family only. My mom, of course, informed him that she was indeed my mother. Thankfully, one of the new nurses was a longtime friend of my mom's, so she was allowed inside, and my stepmother was removed from the room. From what I've been told, the pastor later reprimanded my stepmother for lying to him about my mother's involvement in my life. My mother was, in fact, very present and engaged. In fact, I was supposed to go to her house that day after she got off work, which conveniently was right after the Super Bowl. After being released from the hospital, I went home with my mom, and things were okay. I was off school for a week because the seizure was unexpected, and my primary care doctor wanted to monitor me closely. However, everything changed when I returned to my dad's house. After my first day back at school, I was doing my assigned chore of washing dishes when my stepmother came into the kitchen. My dad was in their bedroom playing World of Warcraft at the time. She looked at me and told me that it was entirely my fault that the church was upset with her and that she despised me for it. I was just 11 years old, and this 28-year-old woman was blaming me for getting in trouble with the pastor whom she had lied to. On top of that, she and my dad would constantly dismiss any illness or pain I experienced after the seizure. They would say things like, "It's all in your head," or "You're overreacting, your pain can't be that bad." My dad was a veteran in the United States Navy, so he often dismissed my complaints, believing my pain tolerance should be higher. What he didn't realize was that the medication I had been taking for years significantly lowered my ability to tolerate pain. Ironically, in some ways, they weren't entirely wrong. More on that later. From that day forward, my stepmother and I completely resented each other. No matter what I did, she found a way to reprimand me. She even made me late for a high school English assignment because I made the mistake of saying that Greek mythology made more sense to me than the Bible. I still stand by that today, as I now practice Norse paganism and moon-based Wicca. She became so insecure about my hatred of her that she once asked me to show her my private messages with my school-assigned counselor. I was 14 at the time and struggling with my mental health due to dual suicide attempts. Even then, as someone fascinated with forensic science and obsessed with crime shows like Criminal Minds and Law and Order, I knew that was highly inappropriate and illegal. I informed my counselor about it in our next session, and thankfully, the issue was shut down immediately. Story 6. Greetings, people of Reddit. I have loved reading these stories, but never thought I would need to post one. This is my first story, so don't be surprised when you get bored. Anyway, a little backstory. I am a male and 16 years old from the UK. This story happened 4 or 5 months ago on my 16th birthday, but I only just thought of posting it. This was around the time of the Xbox Series X and PS5 hype. Anyway, to the story. It is March 25, 2021, and it is my birthday party. Cringe, I know. I have recently received an Xbox Series X as a birthday gift. I had not long set it up when my cousin, who I'm going to call the nice cousin, asked if he could have a turn after me. He is 12. I said sure, as long as you are careful. He nodded his head with an obvious grin and thanked me multiple times. After about 30-40 minutes, he left my room and the following conversation took place. Nice cousin, thanks for letting me play. I loved it. Me, no problem, I'm glad you are happy. I'm gonna ask my dad if I can have one. Okay, make sure to ask nicely. My cousin walked off to talk to my entitled uncle, who was smiling and laughing while talking with my dad. His smile turned to a frown. How much money? I heard him say, shocked. He shook his head, then told his kid to go away. I didn't see my cousin much more after that, so I just went outside to find my aunt, who was in the garden. We talked for a bit, but then I heard the familiar sound off my squeaky door hinges. Someone was in my room. I just brushed it off as my mum does the rubbish bins. We have one in every room, and continued my conversation with my aunt. A few minutes later, I heard a car speeding off, and I saw it was my uncle's. using my knowledge of entitled parent stories. My first instinct was to check on my Xbox. To my utter not surprise, it was gone. I told my mom, and she gave me two choices. 1. Call the police. 2. Confront my uncle. I chose option 2 because I didn't want anything to happen to my cousin. I waited a bit, then my mom drove me to my entitled uncle's house. When I arrived, the first thing I looked at was my nice cousin's window. Yep, he was playing my Xbox. I knocked on the door and was met with no answer. I tried 3 times, but he never answered. I just called the police, and I ended up getting my Xbox back, plus £500 compensation from my uncle, and he had to pay for damages my cousin made to my cables and monitor, while scrambling to get it out of my room. I got £700 total. I don't know how the damages added up to £200, but I'm not complaining.